Hey, those of you who are on the stream, I'm trying to make contact with the radio station, and it looks like the number I was given may not work. This number is not working. So, I hate to have to put me back on there again. So those of you on the stream, I was hoping to have Harley here with me this morning. I don't know if he got distracted or had to go do something else or whatever. I have plenty to do and talk about. I want to give you one example. There's a message coming in. What message? It should be scheduled for February. It should be scheduled before the end of January. The schedule should be for the end of January. They're already scheduled. Message here. I'm sorry. Please just be patient. I'll be with you here shortly. Just more and more of this silliness. Come on, come on, come on. And her knee, I think right knee was replaced 10 years ago. It's still causing after 10 years. And we let me try it again. They come into the mission. She was brought in by herself. 801 967 5435 345. And we helping to change. No, it's not working. The number I was given to call K-Talk is not working. So, I think what I'm going to do is go ahead, for you very few who are there this morning. Yes, the tinfoil hat's been vindicated once again. Oh boy, here we are sitting on the edge of a new war in the Middle East, a new war that could easily become World War III before you know it. And here I am, worried sick over the fact that Harley's supposed to be calling me. And I'm not showing any evidence that he got through. And I am trying to call the radio station so I can simulcast at K-Talk. And nothing's working there. So let me call Paul. And see if I can't make some progress. Just be patient. I got plenty to talk to you about this morning.
Yes, sir.
That number you gave me is not working.
It's up in the top right corner.
What's in the top right corner?
It's right, the number. It somehow the wrong number went out. In the top right corner of the Zoom speaker.
On Zoom.
978 5345.
Not 978 5345.
Yes.
All right.
Sorry.
Thanks a lot, Paul.
Yeah, because I was wondering. Okay, thanks.
All right, bye-bye. Wrong number. All right, now we're going to try it again. All right, that should do it. We should be in business now.
Um, so I just need the current thing there to finish talking. And let me get the, I can get the recorder going, hopefully. And then we'll be in business here. I hate demonstrating this incompetence. But hey, I'm only in my 31st year of radio broadcasting. And I need a little bit more understanding. All right, let's go. It's, 6 minutes after the hour. I had tried to make arrangements for Harley to be here with me this morning, and I don't see any evidence that he had tried to call or anything else. So, let's just go from here. So anyway, I cannot start with anything else actually this morning without the increasing incredible danger of a new war in the Middle East. It may not happen, but it could happen here could happen today. It could happen in the next 2 or 3 days. There is a rather significant all right, hold on. I don't want to swap, I want to add. All right, now just hold on, everybody. Merge the two calls here. Harley, you there? Oh, wait a second. I'm going to turn the volume way up. All right, let's try again. You there?
Yes, hello, do you hear me?
Yeah, they're good. Now you should be able to come through on the radio as well as the stream. All right, well, good morning,
Okay.
Harley.
Good morning, how are you?
Good. I just started off by saying that we are sitting here I expected to hear this morning on the news that we were in World War III. I always like to start Monday off with a little bit better, vision than that. But with a significant force of 40,000 American troops, an aircraft carrier there, 2 more on the way if they're not already there, for no other reason I can think of than beginning hostilities with the sovereign nation of Iran.
Well, I think a lot of people expected that war would start before the end of the weekend. But there's something here called reality, which seems to be outside of the grasp of some people in Washington. But what happened was a whole sequence of events that changed the situation. Number one, they thought they could get a regime change from mobilizing a color revolution of the people. And what happened is, and this wasn't reported in the West at all, the Iranian government did something smart. They explained to the people the reason that they were hungry, that food costs were up, that the economy was bad, was because of the sanctions. And unlike in most countries, the people believed the government and they dispersed. Now, we were told it's because they killed 50,000 people, but there's no evidence that that's true. Now, secondly, none of the other governments in the region, the Arab or Muslim governments, would support the U.S. in a war. And that's important because Trump is seriously trying to get this Abraham Accords through. The third point is that the American people don't really want a war. And the fourth point is the U.S. military doesn't want a war because they're saying we can't win a war easily in this situation. And to go back to the question of the American people, that the President Trump, does not want to have boots on the ground. And the only way to do what he was saying he would do would be to have boots on the ground. And the final factor against the war was that Netanyahu was not so willing to sacrifice Israeli cities because Israel's defense showed in June of last year that it was not up to countering a large-scale ballistic missile attack. So these were all things that militate against the idea of military action. And that doesn't mean that war is off the agenda, but because you have people in the U.S. Congress like Lindsey Graham who are just dying to have another war. The military-industrial complex overall, the neocons, the Bush Republicans, they still want war. But I think for the moment, reality has made the case so that President Trump held back from launching a strike. And then it looks like there may actually be negotiations going on.
Now, by negotiations, just behind the scenes trying to talk this thing down, because there was some talk about the Eisenhowers already retreating to the Indian Ocean.
Well, as I said, it's not guaranteed there won't be a war. And if there is, it will be something that will not be the kind of cakewalk that happened in Venezuela.
Oh, well, no. And several experts that I've listened to over the last several days say it's absolutely impossible for boots on the ground to make any advance in Iran. I mean, we have no way of supporting them. We have no way of getting them in there. And any time the attack starts, the Straits of Hormuz is going to be closed down, so you can't get to them that way. And then you can't come in. Iraq and Syria certainly aren't going to support that kind of an action, and they're too far away. Gee, I mean,
but Jack, here's the other point.
Yeah,
there are some people in the military who have learned that you can't use overwhelming power to impose a political objective. Now, the other question is, what is the political objective? Remember, the president said we destroyed their nuclear capability in June. So why was he saying we have to go to make sure they don't develop nuclear weapons?
I wonder.
So it's a small group of people that want a war. Now, do you think Lindsey Graham cares if the war leads to lots of casualties and a big cost?
No, not in the least.
Lindsey Graham he's just a psychopath, a sociopath. So for the moment, it appears that those people who are more realistic won the argument. But as I said, in 2003, when we went into Iraq, there were many, many good reasons not to do it. Did we learn from that?
Apparently not. Apparently not. And the idea about Lindsey Graham and some of these other people, I'm sure the last the strike three against the attack this weekend must have been President Trump's handler, Bibi, saying, hey, maybe we ought to just put this off a little while longer. Because I'm sure if Bibi was pushing, do it anyway, Donald. I can't help but think he would.
The Israelis, we were told that the June 12-day fight was a slam dunk victory for Trump and for Israel. We weren't told that the Israelis panicked because a number of these Iranian ballistic missiles got through the Iron Dome, even when we had the rest of the Arab world helping us. So, that's why I'm saying sometimes reality is a harsh teacher, but even people not so bright can figure it out.
Well,
that just says that Lindsey Graham is not as smart as a rock. He can't figure out anything.
Well, I think there were 2 or 3 missiles that hit Tel Aviv. And
that's right.
That must have been their hypersonics, wouldn't you say?
Probably.
Yeah, and if they have plenty of hypersonics, and there's even the possibility.
A lot more now. Yeah.
They got a lot more now, and there's even the possibility. I heard someone over the weekend saying they might even have an Oreshnik or 2. And you would think that the Mossad's intelligence would be, inclusive enough to have figured all this stuff out even 2 or 3 weeks ago, if not earlier, that it could ever have gotten to this stage where there was some last reality awakening that finally pulled the plug. Certainly Mossad is aware of all this stuff, let alone the CIA.
Well, the Mossad is aware of it, but there are the elements in the Mossad that make Lindsey Graham look sane.
Well, that's true. Yeah.
And some of the people in the Mossad may actually be part of the Messianic faction among the Zionists who figure that God will intervene to bail them out. What they don't realize is that it's not God that would bail them out, it's the United States, and the United States is not all powerful right now.
Right, right. And with this idea that we obliterated, which was the words that President Trump used last June, that we obliterated their nuclear stuff, and that there were perhaps 300 to 400 cruise missiles that were used. Now there's going to be thousands. And then it's not just hitting back at Israel. It's all the American bases in the region and the closing of the Straits of Hormuz. And
well, Jack, the question of the oil is a really important one because the Iranians could shut down the Straits.
Yeah.
And there's some people who are saying that, well, maybe that's what the U.S. would want because then the Iranians could sell their oil. Well, it would mean that about 1/4 of all the oil that's consumed by the world comes through the Straits of Hormuz.
Well, in China isn't going to sit there and have the Strait shut down.
No, of course not. But the other factor, and this is one, again, that most people don't know about because it's never talked about, is that the economy, the Western economy is very fragile right now. And if you cut off oil for a period of time or have another increase in the price of oil, it's going to have an impact, including on the U.S. And what we're finding, I listened to a report. One of my colleagues, Paul Gallagher, gave a report on Saturday on the effect of the tariffs. And it's really fascinating. Out of the $250 billion that we supposedly have collected in tariffs, 96% of that was paid by U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers. So it wasn't punishing other countries. And that with all that money that came in, that was supposedly going to lead to a manufacturing boom, 11 of the last 12 months, we've lost jobs in manufacturing in the United States. So, the geniuses who are coming up with these plans are having them blow up in their faces.
Well, the application of tariffs today was a little bit different than what the founders had in mind.
Yeah, exactly. And the Hamilton was not trying to punish other countries, but actually carry out a full revolution for the United States, for the new American nation. And I think if you listen to the Jameson Greer speech at Davos, he did get some of the things right. But what he didn't get right is unless you have a credit policy, that is a bank controlled by someone other than thieving swindlers, which the Federal Reserve is controlled by thieving swindlers, they don't give a damn if the money goes back into the American economy, and it's not. It's not going back in. So it's not the same intent as Hamilton and the same intent as the American founders, which was to create a basis for increasing the power of each worker employed. If you do it as just a money thing, and unfortunately that's the way people think about economics now, it's about how you make money, as opposed to how you build something for the future by improving the quality of life of every person in the country. So, the economy is a real hidden weakness, and there are some people around Trump who are not idiots and understand that we're coming up to the 2026 midterm elections, and they don't favor the Republicans right now. And they're beginning to panic. So some of them may have tried to convince Trump that a quick military victory will do wonders for his standing.
Well, you see what just happened
I-
in Texas this weekend.
That's right. I was just going to get to that.
Oh, okay.
A
Go ahead.
solid Republican district switched over to the Democrats.
Yeah, it's like 30 or 40 years Republican.
Well, it was 17% for Trump in that district in 2024. And the Republican candidate who was endorsed by Trump lost by 13%. So it was a huge turnaround. And we also see the polls showing that what Tucker Carlson is saying, which is the Americans, even the Republican Party, even the people who voted for Trump, less than half of them want to have a war with Iran. And so somebody in there may be smart enough to figure out that losing a war to Iran is not going to be good for the Republicans in the 2026 midterms.
Well, that's just it. And if you, I mean, how can you win something that fast when Iran has the capability now of letting loose the dogs of war if they are attacked, as they have promised they would do throughout the Middle East region, wherever there's an American base, not just Israel. But and then how they're keeping the carriers, outside of cruise missile distance, because they know how vulnerable they are. It's just it's madness.
There are 8 American bases within reach of the Iranian missiles.
Yes.
And if you think that we're saying there are 30 to 40,000 troops, how many body bags would come back before people would turn on this? Because we've seen it before. We've been told it's a slam dunk. We'll win this easily. That people don't trust the Iranian government. Well, the people who say things like that forget that the American people don't trust our government. So we're at a point where history is moving ahead, and too few people actually understand the dynamics driving this historic moment. And those include the fact that we've reached the end of the imperial system that was the London Wall Street looting system. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't do a lot of damage. When the Roman Empire fell, it wasn't so good for the Roman people. But it took a couple hundred years for Rome to fall. We've already been through about 30 years of a retraction of our capability as the imperial power in the world. And what we're seeing is the limitations of the Wolfowitz Doctrine, the Bush-Cheney outlook. And don't forget, Obama and Biden were very strong supporters of the same policy as the Bushes. So the Democratic Party doesn't have an alternative either. And I think, Jack, one of the things that people didn't really get from what happened at the Davos summit is that you had all sorts of people putting forward reasons why things aren't working, but none of them presented a solution. None. And that's what's wrong with the leadership we have in the world right now. They're beginning to realize that what we're doing isn't working, but they've forgotten or never learned what worked in the past.
Well, let me ask you this. All this talk in Abu Dhabi, is that a continuation of Anchorage, or is it just theater?
Well, from what is reported from the Russians, they're reporting very little. But the little they're reporting, they're saying it's serious discussion. Now, I suspect that the serious discussion may be going on between Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev, the Russian representative. Now, how much of that gets back to Trump? How much of that gets back to the U.S. policymakers? That's not clear. What is clear is that Trump is well aware that the problem now is Zelensky. And there's ample evidence that the Chinese and the Russians are betting on Donald Trump. You know, their view is that this has to work because the alternatives are not acceptable.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, with all the problems I have with some of what Trump says, he understands that in the realm of great power politics, a war with Russia or China would be unthinkable. And as a result, he's talking quite straightforward with the Russians and the Chinese. Now, the big problem is the still unreconstructed neocons in the United States and the complete fools in Europe. And there may even be a shift going on in Europe now. So I can give you a little bit of a report on that if you want.
Yes, definitely. Because the last, I don't know, it sometimes the word coming out of there flip-flops as much as what's coming out of President Trump about, you know, conceding land and not conceding land, and I mean, there's some things we know that are not going to happen. Ukraine is not going to become a part of either NATO or the EU. And Ukraine is not going to have a standing military, more than a few thousand people. And Ukraine is going to change their constitution to avoid the problems that have happened since 2014 and make it forever against their constitution to be a part of Ukraine. And but this flip-floppy stuff about trading property back and forth, that's still not clear in my head.
Well, think about it this way. The Europeans are aware of the economic crisis confronting them. They're clear on that. But they still think that they can get the United States to use its military power to enforce a continuation of a kind of unipolar world. That is, they can't accept the idea that they're going to be cut out of the decision-making process. Now, the reality is, because of the weakness of the European Union, they've been out of the decision-making process for a while. The only country in Europe that's mattered in terms of the decision-making process has been the British, because of the long-standing networks that the MI6 and British intelligence and the City of London have all over the world, but most importantly inside the United States. But they are not the dominant force anymore. But what we're seeing is the loss of power of Germany and France and the United Kingdom, which this is one area where I think Donald Trump may be doing something that's quite useful, which is breaking apart the old instruments of the old order. Now, whether he knows for sure what he's doing, that I can't tell you. But he's created a situation where the Europeans are not capable of standing up on their own. They can talk all they want about fighting Russia in 2 or 3 years. That would be a massacre. There's no way that the Europeans can defeat the Russians. Now, we know that because of what you were just saying. Ukraine, with all the weapons, including from the United States, couldn't win a war against Russia. And the Russians aren't even really using their capabilities. So will reality awaken the minds of the European leaders? I don't think so. I think the European leaders are sort of like the person who stayed too long in a job and punches the clock in the morning and then falls asleep at their desk. They don't know what they're doing. And just as an example, how do you fight a war against Russia if you can't move goods across your country? If you don't have a steel industry, if you don't have energy, most of the energy that's still being produced in Germany, for example, is going to data centers for AI, for the tech sector. The cost of electricity has almost tripled since I've been living in Germany. That's 10 years, a tripling of the cost of electricity. The auto sector, the sales of German cars, and you know how important the cars are for the Germans. Besides the fact that they love them, it's been the driver of the economy. The standard automobile sales are down 24% this year from last year. Truck sales and heavy equipment sales are down 34%.
Now, is that domestic sales or international?
That's international. The domestic sales are down because the Germans don't have the income they used to have, and because of the inflation. So the auto sector, and also because they made a stupid bet on the electric vehicle.
Yeah.
Volkswagen was going to compete with the Chinese by producing something called the Volkswagen. And the Chinese can produce something that would be better than what they're producing in Germany at half the cost or less. So who's going to buy a Volkswagen when you don't even have the place to refuel? So they've made a horrible decision on the green economy. The fact that they never wanted to get to the bottom of who blew up the Nord Stream pipelines shows how out of touch they were. And the fact that you have governments in power that can't do anything. I mean, Macron, the French president, is at about 14% popularity right now. And he's had 4 governments that he created in the last year. That is the prime minister and the other coalitions they pulled together. 4 of them have collapsed without being able to pass a budget. In Germany, Merz, who was a minority president when he came in, he only had about 30% of the vote in the last election. He's running at about 18% right now. And no one knows where the hell Starmer is. But Starmer was just in China. The Europeans are in India. They're saying to the Indians, we'll do anything for you if you break with Russia. And the Indians are saying, well, we're not going to break with Russia because we believe in this non-aligned principle. The Germans just sent this guy named What a Fool. That's literally his name, Vatterfool, or What a Fool. He was sent to China. And the Chinese had the lowest level diplomats meet him at the airport. The only thing that would have been worse is if no one met him.
Yeah, I talked about that on my show a couple of weeks ago. I thought, what a slap in the face. And just a kind of a testament to how desperate the Western nations are, because they see all this power and this money slipping through their fingers because of the tremendous dynamic that is now behind BRICS, behind the global majority, and that Iran becoming a part eventually of BRICS. This has disaster written all over it as far as Western hegemony is concerned. And so,
absolutely.
And it just, hey, how about a couple of comments about Mark Carney and what he said in Davos, and a little bit about the national security strategy and national defense strategy. I mean, if you read these things very clearly, the U.S. is absolutely foot-pounding, fist-pounding, demanding American hegemony to continue. And in the light of what Mark Carney said at Davos, talk about that.
Well, the thing about Carney is that you can't really disagree with his conclusion, which is that the system's gone, that it's run down. The funny thing about it is that happened because of the policies that he was the champion of. Remember who Carney is. Carney was the former head of the Bank of Canada, then the head of the Bank of England, which is at the center of the Great Reset. He's the one who went to Jackson Hole, Wyoming in 2019 and laid out what the Great Reset is supposed to be. And we reported on it at the time, and people said, oh, no, that's not what they're doing. But what did he say? He said, we're going to strip every country of sovereignty. We're going to have a coalition of central banks that make all the decisions. And keep in mind, what are the central banks? They're basically instruments of the private banks, not of a government. And what Carney said, and this was explicit at Jackson Hole, and this is the old Brzezinski, Samuel Huntington line about how you can't have sovereign nations. What he said is that you can't let governments decide the policies based on what the people want. In other words, the way we think ideally of representative government, Republican form of government in the West, is that the people choose representatives who go and represent their interests. Well, all you have to do is look at the Congress and realize that's not true anymore. There are probably only a handful of congressmen who really care about what their constituents want or need. And what Carney laid out at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, is that we have to take power away from elected representatives and put it in the hands of technocrats. And the technocrats will tell people what to do. Now, if that wasn't a recipe for disaster, I don't know what was. So here he is now, coming forward as the great hero to stop Donald Trump. And, Trump's message is a mixed message. I think you and I would agree on that. He's not right on a lot of things. He's right on some things. But what he's failed to do is deliver on his promise to crush the deep state, to crush the special interests. They prefer war and depression to prosperity. And it's coming back to bite him now. And he's got a very short time where he can do something about it. But that's partly what's written into the national security, the new national security doctrine. The idea that we're going to take control of this hemisphere. Well, we've always had control of this hemisphere, and that's not the solution. The question is, and that's also not the Monroe Doctrine. The whole idea of the Monroe Doctrine was to keep European imperial powers from coming in and looting the countries of South America. Not that we should loot them, but that we should allow them to be free and independent. So, there's a lot that's mixed up there. Now, the key thing about Carney is that, as you know, Jack, very well, the British Empire always has a fallback option. But Lord Palmerston said, Britain has no permanent friends, only permanent interests. Their interest is their power. And now they realize, and they've realized this since Trump was first elected, that he's not there for the City of London. He may not know what to do about it, but he's not for the City of London. And they've done everything they could, pulled every agent and operative they have to try and bring him down. And they haven't been able to. And so what do the Brits do? What they're going to try to do is accept this idea that there'll be three spheres of influence. The U.S. in the West, Russia in conjunction maybe with Germany in Europe, and then the Chinese in Asia. And now that's why Starmer was in China. That's why Ursula von der Leyen was in India. They're trying to mend their fences with these up-and-coming powers to make sure that they're not an also-ran.
Well, what do they have? What do they possibly have to offer, von der Leyen and Starmer? Well, they go there. I mean, England is Britain. The United Kingdom is quickly becoming not a whole lot more than just an island fading in its power off the coast of Europe. I mean, what do they have to offer India? What do they have to offer China that BRICS doesn't already do for them?
Well, the only thing they have to offer is that they can still do damage to the economy. And think about a blustering Tony Blinken going to India 5 times to say, look, we're going to sanction you if you keep buying oil from Russia. And the Indians say, well, where are we supposed to get it from? How can you do that? The Indians, what they mistake is that the Indians have this longer-term commitment to non-alignment. That goes back to Indira Gandhi, to Nehru, and from the beginnings of modern India. And it goes against the domination by imperial powers. China has a very clear memory of what it was like when the policies were determined outside of China, from the period of the mid 18th century until really 2000. And these are countries that adopted an anti-colonial policy as a life-saving measure for them. And now it's working. So why would the Indians trade that to be able to have some fish and chips in London? You know, the British economy, as you correctly point out, is hardly a robust, productive sector. And here's the really sad thing. The view of the policymakers who still think that the West can command a unipolar order is that it's the tech sector and artificial intelligence that is the power in the West. But here's the problem. China's ahead of us in artificial intelligence. They're ahead of us in labor-saving technological advance. And we don't have the capability in the West to do much more than to build a mechanism to spy on people, to control the internet, and to censor and to lie. And you can lie and control people for quite a while, but at a certain point when they're hungry, that's when the pitchforks come out. And we're reaching that point now where there are people in, for example, I don't know if you know this, the ICE has sent a team of people to Milan, supposedly to do security for the Winter Olympics. And there's a huge uproar in Italy because they've been watching what ICE is doing in the United States. And they're saying, we don't want this. And the era where the United States can do whatever it wants and go wherever it wants, that era is coming to an end. Either we learn to cooperate for mutual benefit with sovereign states, or we're going to be left behind. And that's the simple reality that most Americans haven't been told yet.
Did Milan ask for this?
No, not at all. What's going to come out in the next week or two is that there are a couple of things about this ICE deployment. Now, we, as you know, Jack, we've always said that the immigration system in the United States had broken down. In fact, for the whole Western world, it broke down.
Yes.
But it broke down partly because all the wars that we were carrying out against these poor countries were creating a flow of immigrants that couldn't be handled. We created it between the International Monetary Fund austerity policies and the wars. Why do you think there's so many Syrians and Afghans flooding into Greece and Italy and Germany and England? So we do have to fix the system. But that doesn't mean that we turn our police forces or our federal authority against the population. And if you look at what caused the big uproar in Minneapolis, it's that in the treaty case, you had someone who legally owned a gun who was gunned down by ICE. Here's what I'm going to tell you, which most people don't know. A lot of the ICE training is being done by Israelis. That there's a training center in Tel Aviv where we're sending the so-called elite people in ICE, And then we're just recruiting anyone off the street who's willing to put on a mask and go out and beat people up.
Well, I think they get a
So
nice
this
big
has-
signing bonus too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that once about the training center in Tel Aviv, and maybe I
Well,
should have talked about that more since. But yeah, that they have a direct hand in the training of the highest levels of ICE.
Well, when you start treating Americans like the Israelis treat Palestinians in Gaza, and you don't distinguish, I mean, essentially, the major target of ICE is dark-skinned people from the South, the Southern Hemisphere. But then when it turns out that if people start saying, what about our constitutional rights? And there are people who are marching in cities all over the country who are saying, we have a constitution that doesn't allow us to go in and snatch someone out of a church or take a 5-year-old boy and his father who are no threat to anybody and send them down to a detention center in Texas.
Yeah, where's the warrants?
This is, well, and this is where the interesting thing on this is that Trump figured that Kristi Noem could be competent, and she's not. But have you been reading who's actually running her office? Corey Lewandowski,
Oh,
her boyfriend. And Trump has this guy, Homan, who's got this reputation as a tough guy, to try and straighten out the mess right now, because it is a mess.
well, and it looks like Homan is sitting down and talking to the opposition rather than shooting them.
Yeah. A novel concept, huh?
Yeah, and it's interesting to me. Even President Trump himself said that Freddie had no legal right to show up with a gun. Well, when he had every legal right to show up with a gun, but not just President Trump, a lot of other idiots that are various pundits, as well as news anchor people on television, various news agencies, all talking about how he asked to be shot because he showed up armed. It just makes me sick.
It's hypocrisy. The people who are saying that are the people who previously had said, we have a right to carry weapons. And now you're turning around saying, well, the Second Amendment only protects people that we say it protects.
Yeah. Well, Trump in his campaign 2 years ago, or a year and a half, whatever, was very heavy on the Second Amendment. And of course, that's what his constituents wanted to hear. And then real heavy on immigration. That's what his constituents wanted to hear. And America first. Now he's gone Israel first. And I really have some concerns after this election in Texas this weekend. Some serious concerns about the midterms. And then what's going to happen if he loses the lower house? What if he loses the House?
Well, it's not as though the Democrats have any ideas either.
Well, no.
They can save the country.
No. But that's the whiplash back against the president in the midterms is not going to be based on ideas and concepts of returning America. It's going to be an emotional action, just completely voting from your amygdala rather than your prefrontal cortex. And so it's going to be a mess.
Well, and that's what I think someone has to sit down with Trump and tell him to calm down a little bit. Recognize that this idea that you can send American troops anywhere in the world and people will bow to your deployment of troops. The world has changed. It's not that way anymore, and it's changed in part because some of these countries that previously would submit to the threats no longer are willing to submit. I mean, in the case of Iran, what the mullahs, and I'm not defending the mullahs, but what they said to the people of Iran is that this is an existential moment for us. If we don't fight, if we don't prepare to fight against the Americans, our country is gone. And they had that sense of desperation when they fought in June against Israel. They fought Israel to a standstill. They knew that they couldn't stop the power of the United States, and they also knew that if things got out of control, Netanyahu wouldn't hesitate to use nuclear weapons against them. But they basically reached the point where they said, we have no choice but to fight. And when you take away the option of having a negotiated settlement that allows the other person, even if they have to surrender, they can surrender with dignity and know that they'll have some rights. You take that away and you create an enemy that is going to be hard to suppress. And with China and Russia as peer military with the United States, even if we have still areas where we're stronger than them, there are areas where we don't have that strength. And you can't just go around the globe as a bully. That's the old British model. So we've got to rethink everything.
Well, that requires some thinkers. That's what I like about the Schiller Institute. It's loaded with thinkers.
I was going to say, fortunately, Jack, we have people like you around the country who also are thinkers. And, you know, the interesting thing is Lyndon LaRouche is still seen as a threat by the people who think they can do what they want.
Yeah. Yeah, they still use that as a...
Let me give you an example.
Go ahead.
I'll give you a quick example. Jose Vega is running for Congress in the Bronx, New York.
Yes.
Against Richie Torres, who's basically owned and controlled by the Anti-Defamation League and the government of Israel. And Jose is running in the Democratic primary against him and also as an independent, so he can be on the ballot in November. And they're beginning to see a shift go on in the constituency. And so the Jerusalem Post, imagine this is an election in Bronx, New York, one of the poorest districts in the country, but it has a little enclave there, which is a very wealthy Jewish enclave in the Riverdale, the northern part of Manhattan Island. A lot of the young Jewish people who live there are listening to Jose. And his opponent, Richie Torres, has $13 million in the bank for his campaign. Jose might have 2 quarters he can rub together, but he's getting noticed. So the Jerusalem Post ran a big slander saying Jose Vega is a protege of the anti-Semitic fascist Lyndon LaRouche. Why was the Jerusalem Post writing something like that? They're afraid
they're scared
that they've lost. Yes.
Well, yeah, just you know, in parallel to that is the growing Christian community that might have been Christian Zionists that aren't so Zionist anymore, and that there's a wave passing through the ecumenical movement in this country that is turning back to America first. So,
as you remember, Lyndon LaRouche was always optimistic that if it came down to a real brawl, the American people, at least a portion of a strong minority of them, would stand up and fight for principle.
yes.
It may take to the last minute, but if they have leadership, they will fight. And I think what we're seeing now is, look at someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Yeah.
I had thought of dismissed her as a nutcase, but she's not a nutcase. She actually has some principle. Thomas Massey of Kentucky, Rand Paul.
Yes.
There are people like that. Tucker Carlson. So, and our job is to give reality, a sense of the dynamic of real history, to people who are ready to fight. And by fight, I don't mean to pick up guns and go out and shoot people. We still have a capability to do it through the ballot box, but that's going to require a big fight to make sure we have fair elections. So we're in a moment that's a turning point. It is a turning point for the United States.
Hey,
I'm optimistic.
Well, I really am too, because there are times, I have lost some of my audience because I just can't give President Trump a constant pat on the back. However, I do see moments of what I consider real, not just political, but productive lucidity in that man's mind with some of the little things he does now and then or says that makes me still think he's holding a couple of aces up his sleeve that he hasn't had to play yet. But when he does, he'll still come out the patriot that I always thought he was.
Well, you know what those aces are? His relationship with Putin and Xi Jinping.
Yes, amen.
With all that he said about China, he's talking to Xi, and you notice he always says Xi's a smart man. He's a friend of mine. Putin is probably the reason the world hasn't gone into thermonuclear ash is because Putin is calm, and Putin has a good sense that he can talk to Trump. Now, that's basically what's keeping us from having been incinerated. And I think that Trump knows that. And I think that with the willingness, his willingness to be manipulated by fawning sycophants, when it really comes down to it, he can be a patriot. And he knows that the people who are getting him into these crises are the same people who tried to get rid of him in Russiagate.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that I just keep writing articles about it. All roads lead to London. And have you noticed more and more people are saying that now?
Now that you mention it. Hey, we've got just a couple of minutes left. What are we going to do with the START treaty? It's this week, I think.
Yeah, 3 days, 4 days.
Yeah.
Well, here's where he's got to pull a rabbit out of the hat, because this is the last agreement we have. And even people who are anti-Putin will tell you that Russia has strictly abided by that agreement. And what the Russians are saying is that they want that agreement renewed, and then we can talk to the other nuclear countries. The people telling Trump what to do on it are telling him, no, we have to get an agreement to include Israel, not Israel, but include France and the other nuclear powers, which you'll never get. It wouldn't be very difficult to get Sergei Lavrov to sit down with American diplomats and say, okay, let's sign a new agreement. And this is where you have people like Scott Ritter who will tell you that this is something that's doable if you keep the neocons and the Bush Republicans out of it. So this is the next confrontation point, in terms of, at some point, the military in Russia is going to say to Putin, look, we can't wait for the U.S. to become sensible.
Harley, thanks for being a part of the show. You are one of my dearest friends, and we go back a long way, more than 2 decades, and it's always a thrill for me to be able to listen to the experience and the conclusions, or at least the working, living conclusions you have in your mind, expressed on my radio show. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you, Jack, and I, of course, consider you a great friend and an example of what a real patriot is.
I know some people might disagree with you, but thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, we'll do this again
We'll
here
talk again
before
soon.
long.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye. Well, now it's just us for a few seconds here. I think we're coming to the end of the show. I hope this has been as beneficial for you as it is for me. It's just, he straightens me out on a few things where I think I'm a little out in the weeds, but I want to continue the theme of what he's talking about on tomorrow's show. So you keep your wits about you. Be careful out there. I'm going to end the stream now.